The desert highway stretched out like a long, silver ribbon under the cold, indifferent glare of a Nevada moon. My name is Leo ***, and back then, I was 22, reckless, and far too trusting of the open road. I was driving my beat-up pickup truck toward Las Vegas, hoping to start a new life with nothing but a few $100s and a duffel bag in the passenger seat. It was nearly 2:45 a.m. The radio was humming with lo-fi jazz, the only thing keeping me awake against the hypnotic rhythm of the white lines on the asphalt. The heat of the day had long since vanished, replaced by a biting high desert chill that seeped through the cracks in my window. I was about 50 miles from the nearest gas station when my headlights caught a shape on the shoulder of the road. As I got closer, the shape resolved into a man. He was tall, gaunt, and wearing a heavy flannel shirt that looked far too thick for the desert season. He stood perfectly still, his thumb extended, his face cast in deep shadow by the brim of a sweat-stained trucker hat. Normally, I wouldn't stop for a stranger at this hour, but out here, in the middle of the big empty, leaving someone behind felt like a death sentence. I eased onto the gravel shoulder, the dust swirling in my red tail lights. The man didn't run to the door or wave excitedly. He walked with a slow, deliberate limp, as if every step was a calculation. When he reached the passenger side, I leaned over and unlocked the door. "Heading toward the city?" I asked, trying to sound more confident than I actually felt. The man climbed in, and the cabin was immediately filled with a heavy, unsettling scent. He smelled of old tobacco, metallic rust, and something sickly sweet, like rotting peaches. He didn't answer me immediately. Instead, he pulled a small, polished wooden box from his pocket and set it carefully on his lap, cradling it as if it held something priceless. "Just as far as the crossroads, son," he said. His voice was a dry, rhythmic rattle, like sandpaper being dragged across glass. "The name's Carl ***. I'm Leo," I replied, pulling back onto the highway and trying to focus on the road. For the first 10 miles, Carl was an eerie statue. He just sat there, staring straight ahead through the windshield. But I could feel his eyes shifting toward me every few seconds, scanning my profile. I tried to make small talk to ease the mounting tension in my chest. "You live out here, Carl. There isn't much but sand and coyotes for miles." Carl turned his head slowly. His eyes were bloodshot, the pupils dilated so wide they looked like bottomless black pits in the dark cabin. "I go where the work is, and lately, Leo, business is booming." He reached into the wooden box on his lap. I glanced over, expecting him to pull out a cigarette or perhaps a map. Instead, he pulled out a *** box cutter ***. The silver blade clicked as he slid it out. 1 notch, 2 notches, 3. The sharp ***click was deafening in the quiet truck. My grip tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My heart began to pound against my ribs. "Hey man, what's with the blade? Put that away." Carl didn't look at me. He began to rhythmically tap the flat of the blade against the side of the wooden box. Tap, 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 tap. "Safety first, Leo," he whispered, a thin, yellow-toothed grin spreading across his face. "The world is a dangerous place for a young man like you. You never know who you might pick up on a dark road." He started running the blade along the fabric of the passenger seat, right next to his leg, making a soft, tearing sound. Every time I glanced at him, he was staring at my arms, specifically my forearms, which were exposed as I gripped the wheel. "You've got good skin, Leo," Carl remarked, his voice dropping to a low, melodic hum that made my skin crawl. "No tattoos, no blemishes, very pristine. They like it when it's pristine." I have a scar," I stammered, my voice cracking. I didn't even know why I said it. It was a lie born of pure, instinctive terror, a desperate attempt to make myself less perfect in his eyes. The tapping stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavier than the desert night itself. Carl turned his entire body toward me, the box cutter still gripped tightly in his gnarled hand, the moonlight reflecting off the edge of the blade. "A scar?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp and cold. "Where?" The atmosphere inside the truck shifted from uncomfortable to predatory in a single heartbeat. Carl didn't just look at me. He looked asterisk through asterisk me, as if he were mentally taking me apart and labeling the pieces. He leaned across the center console, the box cutter still gripped in his hand, though he had retracted the blade just enough to leave a sliver of steel exposed. "A scar," he repeated, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous octave. "Where exactly? Show me, Leo, now." My hands were trembling so violently that the truck began to drift toward the shoulder. I gripped the wheel with my right hand and pulled up the sleeve of my left arm. The 3-inch, jagged line of pale tissue near my elbow stood out against my skin. It was a souvenir from a childhood accident, climbing a rusted fence to escape some neighborhood bullies. Carl grabbed my arm. His skin felt like old, dry leather, cold and entirely devoid of warmth. He pulled my arm closer to his face, squinting his bloodshot eyes as he inspected the mark. He ran the tip of his thumb over the scar, his touch light but firm. "How long ago?" he barked. 10, maybe 12 years ago," I stammered. "I was just a kid." Carl let out a sharp, jagged hiss of breath through his yellow teeth. He slammed my arm back toward the steering wheel and retreated to his side of the truck. He didn't look relieved. He looked absolutely furious. He began tapping the box cutter against the wooden box again, but this time the rhythm was frantic. A rapid-fire asterisk clack, 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 clack that filled the cabin like a swarm of angry insects. "Ruined," he muttered, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles pulsing in his neck. "Damaged goods. Do you have any idea how much time I've wasted tonight? Do you have any idea how hard it is to find someone? Pristine." "Carl, I don't understand," I said, my voice cracking. "What does a scar have to do with anything? I'm just giving you a ride." He turned to me, and for the first time I saw the true madness in his eyes. "You aren't a driver, Leo. You're merchandise, or you were supposed to be. My associates at the crossroads. They don't pay for scarred leather. They want it perfect. They want it clean. No marks, no tattoos, no history written on the skin." The realization hit me like a physical blow. The business he had mentioned wasn't labor or construction. He was a scout. He was looking for people whose bodies could be sold, piece by piece, to buyers who paid a premium for perfect specimens. The box cutter wasn't for protection. It was the tool used to mark the merchandise if it tried to run. "I can't use you," Carl spat, the words dripping with disgust. "The crossroads won't take a second-hand soul." Suddenly, he reached over and slammed his foot onto the brake pedal. The truck screeched to a halt, tires screaming against the asphalt, sending a cloud of desert dust billowing over the hood. Before I could even process what was happening, Carl had lunged across the seat. He didn't use the blade. He grabbed my collar and shoved me against the driver's side door, his face inches from mine. "Get out," he growled. "What?" "Get out of the truck," he roared. He didn't wait for me to move. He reached over me, unlatched the door, and kicked me square in the chest. I flew backward out of my own vehicle, landing hard on the sharp gravel of the shoulder. The air was knocked out of my lungs, and for a moment the world was nothing but a blur of stars and dust. I looked up just in time to see Carl slide into the driver's seat. He didn't look back. He slammed the door, shifted into gear, and floored it. The gravel sprayed my face as my own truck, my only means of escape, disappeared into the darkness, its red tail lights fading until they were nothing more than 2 tiny pinpricks of blood in the distance. I was left alone in the middle of the Nevada desert, 50 miles from help, with nothing but the sound of my own frantic breathing and the terrifying knowledge of what would have happened to me if I hadn't been damaged goods. The silence that followed the roar of my truck's engine was absolute. I stood alone on the shoulder of the highway, the gravel biting into my palms where I had fallen. The Nevada desert at 3:00 a.m. is not just a place, it is a void. The stars above were cold and distant, offering no comfort to a man who had just been discarded like a piece of faulty equipment. I began to walk. Every step was a struggle as the adrenaline faded, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache in my shin where Carl had kicked me. The wind began to howl through the sagebrush, a low mourning sound that seemed to carry the whispers of the crossroads Carl had mentioned. I couldn't stop thinking about his words. They don't pay for scarred leather. I realized then that my childhood injury, the very thing I had spent years being self-conscious about, had just saved my life. I wasn't a person to Carl, I was a harvest, and in his world, a single blemish meant the crop was tainted. After what felt like hours of limping through the dark, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. My instinct was to dive into the ditch and hide. How did I know this wasn't one of Carl's associates? How did I know the next driver wouldn't be looking for someone with a scar for a different, darker purpose? But the cold was settling into my bones, and I knew I wouldn't survive the night on foot. The vehicle slowed down. It wasn't a truck, but a beat-up station wagon. The driver was a man in his late 40s named Marcus. He looked tired, dressed in greasy overalls, smelling of diesel and cheap coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost, kid," Marcus said as I climbed into the warmth of the cabin. "My truck, it was stolen," I managed to say, my voice cracking. I didn't tell him about the box cutter. I didn't tell him about the wooden box or the pristine skin. I just sat there, shivering, watching the desert floor fly by. Marcus took me to a small gas station and eventually let me stay with his family in a nearby town until I could get on my feet. He was a good man, a stark contrast to the predator I had encountered. But even now, years later, the horror hasn't left me. I am 27 now, and I still live with the shadow of that night. Sometimes when I'm driving late at night and I see a hitchhiker standing under a flickering light, I don't slow down, I speed up. Because I still think about the kids who didn't have a scar. I think about the perfect ones who got into Carl's truck and were never seen again. And most of all, I wonder if Carl is still out there, clicking his box cutter, waiting for a piece of merchandise that is finally pristine.